Greetings everyone. Okay, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for your patience. It's been a few weeks since I said we're going to have part 2, but an urgent matter had come up, so part 2 is now ready, and again, thank you very much for your patience. But, I mean, based upon the time that's gone, you may have forgotten about what part 1 was all about, or you may not have seen what part 1 is yet, so please click over here, and it will show you what part 1 is all about, because obviously it's imperative to know everything in its context. So, part 1 is over here, you can click over here. And we're going to start part 2 right now. Okay, so as you've watched part 1, we left with some topics that we're going to focus on in this next part. That being, we'll look into the agitation of these Sunday laws. That we was also going to see something very interesting about the latest Pope, Pope Francis. And lastly, we're going to look at how not to get the mark of the beast. But we're not going to look at them in bullet points. We're going to look at it all together in like a holistic view, so we can see a practical view on how all of this will come about. Now, in part 1, we came to the conclusion that the mark of the beast is not Sunday worship, but rather it is enforced Sunday worship. But the direct foundation isn't based upon the day itself, but it's the underlined question of who is promoting this day, or rather, who are we worshipping and who are we obeying? So the matter isn't necessarily of the day itself. Instead, it's a matter of who we're worshipping. Revelation 13 says to worship the beast, when in Revelation chapter 14, it states that we are to worship the one who created heaven and earth and sea. And we know that the worship of him who made heaven and earth and sea points us back to the Sabbath commandment as the identity and the authority of God the Creator. Now, based upon part 1 of what we saw that these things are going to come into enforcement of law. So the question that we need to ask is if there are any agitations of these Sunday laws towards civil law or any kind of civil legislation. Reason being is because we saw that a beast in Bible prophecy represents a kingdom, and we know that a kingdom speaks through its laws. Well, we'll see that as we go along. Now, after studying along the lines of prophecy and also noticing that this beast represents the papal system, I really wondered about something. If this power is going to be placed in full effect, how are they going to bring Sunday observance as a law, bearing in mind that this is their mark? Now, I was reading this quote from John Paul II in his letter Dies Domini in 1998. Notice the underlined agenda of how they're going to bring Sunday observance as a law in different states of the world. When, through the centuries, she has made laws concerning Sunday rest, the church has had in mind above all the work of servants and workers. Certainly not because this work was any less worthy when compared to the spiritual requirements of Sunday observance, but rather because it needed greater regulation to lighten its burdens and thus enable everyone to keep the Lord's Day holy. Therefore, also in particular circumstances of our own time, Christians will naturally strive to ensure that civil legislation respects their duty to keep Sunday holy. Did you notice the agenda? Did you notice why this was pushed forward as a special day? According to the quote, it wasn't an open agenda to fulfill the church's requirements. Instead, it was placed under a guise to lighten the work of people. In other words, Sunday observance was placed before the people in order to keep them from doing too much work. But the real agenda under the scene was to make the Lord's Day holy. But is it holy according to the word? No. So in other words, attempted Sunday laws were set in place to lighten the burdens of other people, giving them time to rest, to recover, to have time with family, etc. But the real agenda is swept underneath the carpet until it's time for it to come out. So based upon the movements of the agenda of the papacy, we should see Sunday not as a movement as something that promotes the papal system, but rather we should see it put before legislation as something that will help and benefit people who are working and people to have time with their families. Now, what I'm about to show you are some current events that have been researched, and also we're going to see how these things are coming forward along with Bible prophecy and under the true agenda of the papacy. Activists in 12 different European countries joined in public demonstrations on March 4th, calling for the preservation of Sunday as a day of rest. Now, what are these groups made of? The European Sunday Alliance, an umbrella group uniting religious groups. unions, and civic organizations held public activists in Austria, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Croatia, France, Hungary, Italy, Germany, Poland, Slovakia, Switzerland, and Spain. Based on more research, notice what other information we see in the world today regarding these prophetic events of the mark of the beast. Vatican City, the Roman Catholic Church, trade unions and small businesses associations have joined forces in a bid to save Sundays. Now, during this united campaign, one of the leading spokespersons was a woman named Johanna Tuzel. Notice exactly what she says about the issue. Johanna Tuzel, the Alliance spokeswoman, said that setting Sunday aside is not necessarily a religious issue and not discriminatory towards Jews and Muslims. We need one day when everyone can rest, she says. This is the origin of Shabbat, and in fact, even Muslim organizations support us. Now, it's interesting how we are seeing the agenda of the Papal Church come into fruition, not only for the common man, but for other faiths as well. Islam. Can you see that, as the quote mentions, the aim is to suit the needs of the people and not necessarily aimed at religious matters? It's guised in a way that even other religions will join in simply for temporal prosperity. Right now we're in the year 2013. Yet this was mentioned just at the end of 2012. Now let's look at more startling points on the same article regarding this issue. The Reverend Marco Scatalion of Camposamprio, Italy, became an instant celebrity when he labelled Sunday shopping a sin and called on his parishioners to do penance for it. Sundays, he told the Corriere del Veneto newspaper, are important, not just in the religious sense. They are one of the few occasions left for families to be together. So we're seeing trade unions, small businesses, European countries and religious groups like Islam affected. Now notice the effect it even has on other major religious groups, a group we would not even expect to follow after this campaign. And that group is the group of Israel. Premier Shalom decides to launch a campaign on the issue. Says move would cause a revolution as people will receive more leisure rest time. A decade's worth of effort to push the government to make Sunday a day off were renewed over the past 2 weeks after Vice Premier Slavan Shalom decided to begin a campaign on the issue. Notice the startling statement that he says next. This would cause a revolution in Israel. Shalom said in a statement released Thursday, this would make our country more normal, give people more leisure and allow them to return to the work week on Monday a lot more rested. Now, according to the scriptures, Israel had been given the truths in the BC era, which included the Sabbath day. But what's so enlightening is that a nation that already has been given the Sabbath truth says that resting on Sundays would make the country more normal. How can something like this be said from people who have already been given the Sabbath truth, which point out true rest? Well, based on the scriptures, Jesus Christ had to address the Jewish nation regarding their law keeping. 2 areas were brought forward, that was making the law of God a burden and also making the law of God cheap by adding in their own traditions. Matthew 15 verse 3 and 9 says, He answered them, And why do ye break the commandment of God for the sake of your traditions? In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. And so when it comes to the point of making Israel more normal, because the Sabbath has not been kept properly in light of the principle in the scriptures, it isn't a strange thing for them to comply with the popular demand for Sunday to have its access. But the problem is that the agenda behind the scenes are being fulfilled without their knowing so. Now let's move on to some final research. Now this Sunday movement has affected places like Germany, Croatia, and even Singapore. Notice this statement. The Singaporean government's recognition of a weekly rest day as a basic labour right will make the lives of migrant domestic workers better. Now there was a small businesswoman who had a slight problem with this issue because she had maids who did their job too while she wasn't working. And if this law would aid in giving her maids off, 4 days a month, it too would cause a difficulty for her business. Notice what she says. This is bad news for women who are working. If I let her go 4 days a week, talking about her maids, it will be very hectic for me. I need to rest on Sunday too? Now it's interesting that you can take a typical day off, but for this one to say I need to take Sunday off too shows that the mind has been molded under the true agenda behind the scenes. And again, we have places like the government of Greece. Now the headline for the government of Greece states this: Eurozone demands that Greece mandate 6-day work week in exchange for second bailout. You see, what we may not have realized about the Greek government is that the economy in Greece is in a lot of trouble, and so there needs to be an needed extended growth of finances. This will require, as stated, more working. More working means more tax and more money coming into the country. But notice what the Greek Prime Minister Antonios Samaras stated about Sunday. But never on Sunday, says the Greek Prime Minister Antonios Samaras. This is the last such package of spending cuts. The Greek economy can take no more. So it's very interesting that in this Greek economy, knowing that it is not in a higher position, but yet it is degrading and degrading and degrading, they're still having a mindset to save Sunday. Very interesting, isn't it? So when you put all of these excuses together, you will notice the same language spoken by each head. The European Alliance calls for the preservation of Sunday as a day of rest. Trade unions and small businesses says that we need one day when everyone can rest. Johanna Tozel regarding Islam says this is the origin of Shabbat, and in fact even Muslim organizations support us. Again, Reverend Marco says Sunday shopping is a sin. They are one of the few occasions left for families to be together. Premier Shalom of Israel says this would make our country more normal, give people more leisure. The Singaporean government's recognition of a weekly rest day as a basic labor right, and also a businesswoman under this Singaporean government says that I need to rest on Sunday too. Greek Prime Minister Antonios says, but never on Sunday. So as you can see, the same language derives from the true agenda behind the papal system. Notice again what the quote says in Dies Domini of John Paul II, 5th of July 1998. When through the centuries she had made laws concerning Sunday rest, the Church has had in mind above all the work of servants and workers. Then it finishes by saying, but rather because it needed greater regulation to lighten its burdens and thus enable everyone to keep the Lord's Day holy. Therefore, also in particular circumstances of our own time, Christians will naturally strive to ensure that civil legislation respects their duty to keep Sunday holy. Now friends, things are getting very, very clear. Notice what the previous Pope has said in his statement regarding the issue of Sunday rest. The demands of work can't bully people out of needed time, Pope Benedict said. Sunday must be a day of rest for everyone, so people can be free to be with their families and with God, the Pope said. Notice this, by defending Sunday, one defends human freedom. He said during this weekly general audience in St. Peter's Square, June 6, 2012. Now, when I see things like this, there's only a few questions that come to my mind. Taking days off work is usually quite common. I mean, people can take days off any time of the week, they can spend time with their families, and they can also do things on the times that they need to. It doesn't have to be on one specific day. But the question that simply needs to be asked is, why is it placed under civil law? Why not just take a day off? Well, we know why, because of the true agenda that's been hidden under the rug. And so the more that we see these things, the more that we should be alert on what prophecy is actually showing us. Now, friends, as you can imagine, this is a very, very big subject. So more time is going to be needed to explain these things. But what I want you to realize is that things in regards to Bible prophecy are getting closer and closer to the end. So we're going to stop here for now, and we're going to go and continue our subject in part 3. So what we're going to look at in part 3 is some latest and some interesting news about this latest Pope, Pope Francis. And we're also going to see how not to get the mark of the beast. So please keep this matter in mind, because things in this world are getting closer and closer, and the signs are showing more and more that we are coming to the end of time. So I leave you with this verse in Romans chapter 13, which says, "Beside this, you know the time, that the hour has come for you to awake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first believed. The night is far gone and the day is at hand. So then let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light." So thank you very much for watching part 2. Part 3 will be up very soon, but I've also left all the information, all the things that we've researched. It's going to be in the link in the description, but please make sure you also watch the studies, which will show exactly why I came to this conclusion about the papal system. So God willing, I shall see you in part 3. So take care, God bless, bye for now.